We want to talk about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. You always have to find context, and we start finding context in this particular case, for the moment, looking at the Uranus-Pluto square that was active between 2012 and 2015, because whatever we're dealing with now kind of got its start. Well, it got its start, as far back as you want to go, but more recently it resonates with this. This is the Uranus-Pluto square, which really did align us or realign us, or shake us out of alignment in the middle years of this decade, which is, believe it or not, coming to an end. So what we have here is Pluto saying, let's tear up everything that appears to be outdated. We want to get to the bottom of things. Uranus is very freedom-oriented energy, very much an energy to push forward, an energy to innovate, to do things differently. These are obviously two planets that are not really concerned with the status quo. They're quite, they're in their own way, they're quite willing to tear up and change things. Pluto, a slower, deeper kind of transformation, often sort of described as a little bit of a rotting away. Uranus, a much more overt, in-your-face kind of energy. We have with Pluto a great deal of secrecy, not quite sure what's going on. I think a lot of astrologers were really expecting there was going to be some major shakeups. I remember talking to one astrologer in the midst of the Uranus-Pluto square, and he said, I thought by now we'd all be living out in the woods in tents or something like that. It would be the end of civilization. Yeah. But Pluto works slowly, and there is there's some transformative aspects of it that take a long time, and you're not really sure what's going on. And with Pluto, time is irrelevant to the process. I mean, it happens over time. Everything happens over time. But with Pluto, it's not the focus that things are going to happen in an overt way right away. Very different from Uranus. So a lot of the changes that we've had, and we'll discuss how they specifically filter into the area of relationships. A lot of the changes, it takes a while to sort of shake out after the square. So what we're doing in a sense is putting a different frame on the Uranus-Pluto square.
And also, just to say, Armand, that we're talking about relationships, and so imagine that these two, Pluto and Uranus, they effectively were in a relationship. They were squaring each other in the sky for those years between 2012 and 2015. And so think back in your own relationships, if you're listening here, what was going on for you during that time? What kind of things woke up? What kind of things began to be really shaken up? And for some people, there were very dramatic changes, like relationships starting or relationships ending. But this feels like really such an important time in terms of relationships, where really was the start of being invited to really make some radical shifts, and where we could no longer keep our head in the sand about what was going on. And certainly marriage equality was a very big part of that, which was kind of such a radical thing, which started in Hawaii in 1990, with that famous case that came up. And little did we know at the time in 1990, when that started, that it would result in such big changes. And of course, being from Ireland, I have to put up what happened in Ireland, because we were the first country to legalize marriage equality by referendum. And if that doesn't sound like a big deal, think of kind of Ireland being steeped in Catholicism, and, where even divorce took years to come in, So, I mean, this was so enormous and really part of the radical changes of this Pluto-Uranus square. And in June, shortly afterwards, of course, marriage equality throughout the United States. So we can see how this square between these two very big planets, who are really equally powerful energy-wise, really started something that we're then going to talk about, but what's happening now, because that was such a radical opening up, which kind of, opened the potential for a lot of, changes within relationships. And of course, when you think of the whole transgender movement, the non-binary movement, and so on, all of this, the seeds were planted to finally open up things that have been there forever, but really which we weren't really even talking about.
It's really interesting that this got its start in 1990. And we're looking right at that period of 1989 to about 92, 93, where we had the conjunctions of Saturn and Uranus and Neptune in the sign of Capricorn. And that was a time when a lot of barriers started to break down. It was a real time of realignment, and it left a lot of things up in the air. And of course, it required a process. And now with Saturn back in Capricorn and with the Uranus-Pluto square, we're seeing sort of the manifestations of what's happened then. The EU was actually formed with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, and it's not really our topic today, but with the presence of Pluto and Saturn in the neighborhood of 18 Capricorn, we're seeing that they're undergoing some significant challenges. It's that type of thing. You always look back different frames of reference. So we look back to 1990 here and see how what got seeded then came to manifestation later on.
Yes.
So this whole Saturn-Pluto thing could get a little messy. In my conception of it, what happens is that Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2008, and it just kind of rolls through, tearing up the street. I to think about it as being, like sort of coming and ripping up the street to take out and change the sewer pipes. It's going to be this big digging up and everything. You know how it is. You've got to find parking someplace else, and it's just a terrible mess. And then over the last couple of years, Saturn has come along and, repaved the road. Well, what can we still work with? How do we keep things in the box? How do we keep things together? I actually think that when Saturn was in Scorpio, it was sextile to Pluto and Capricorn for a good part of the time. That was also keep stuff in the box, or what can we put back together? You're ripping everything up, but what can we put back together? Now, one of the things that's happening after this Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January is that Saturn is going to get ahead of Pluto. Saturn is going to go ahead of Pluto, and instead of cleaning up afterwards, will kind of be sort of structuring things, and Pluto is going to continue to grind on. And I sort of feel that this is a real potential for some pretty significant change, in the sense that Saturn won't be around to kind of clean up afterwards.
Yeah, I think we're going to it's like doing a detox, and there's all those toxins floating around, and we're left with them. So I think in relationships, people are saying all these kind of issues are coming up that, they were there, they didn't seem so big, and now they're coming up, and it's great they're coming up, but they're kind of floating around, and what do we do with them? So I think it's that uncertainty, which is very uncomfortable. And uncertainty really leads to a lot of fear, because, relationships are one of our anchors in life. You think of what brings us security in life. Most people would say, well, my family, my home, my relationships, obviously my friendships, my community, all of those solid things. And when Pluto starts excavating all of that, all of those things at once, we're kind of left with this feeling of like, well, this doesn't feel too good, and what do I do with this? And then with Saturn, it's hard to kind of clear it all out of the way. So if we see the two of them together, and imagine here they are having a conversation with each other, we know what Pluto and Capricorn is going to say. We've had that already. We've had him for a good while. We're kind of used to Pluto and Capricorn and what he's saying. Now he's with Saturn. Now keep in mind that Saturn is not quite as powerful as Pluto. Saturn is just slightly not as powerful, whereas Uranus was his equal. So we've got two individuals where there's a little bit of a power struggle here, with Pluto really saying, I'm in charge. And Saturn is saying, Pluto wants to tear everything up, and Saturn is, but let's put in some good solid foundations. So in a way, Saturn can be quite in agreement with Pluto and saying it's all right, you've dug it up, but make sure you also put something in good so that it's solid and long lasting. Now, the problem is that if Pluto hasn't finished digging up, then there isn't anywhere for Saturn to really put those foundations in yet, because the digging process is still going on.